Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. Today, we are diving into something pretty interesting, a pretty significant development that could really change things strategically in a very important part of the world, the Indian Ocean.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically, we're looking at some reports from the War Zone website, and they're describing a major military buildup happening on the island of Diego Garcia.
Yeah, and that's what's really grabbing attention here. What we're going to focus on today is figuring out what all this activity could mean, especially given the current situation in the Middle East.
Right, exactly.
And, especially for those of you listening who are aiming for the UPSC exams, this deep dive is going to cover some key areas like geopolitics, U.S. foreign policy, and the strategic importance of certain locations, all those things that are super important for your current affairs prep, whether it's for the mains or even potentially the prelims.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is like daily UPSC mains current affairs, right?
Exactly.
Important topic.
Important topic discussion.
So let's just get right into it. What has the War Zone actually reported seeing on Diego Garcia?
Okay, so based on what they've seen from recent satellite imagery, the War Zone has spotted a pretty noticeable surge in U.S. military aircraft arriving at Diego Garcia. Their analysis seems to show that it's a squadron of B-2 Spirit stealth bombers.
Okay.
Now, the B-2, it's a very special aircraft. It's designed with, this advanced stealth technology, which makes it really hard for radar to even detect. So sending a whole squadron of these things, that's definitely not your everyday operation.
A whole squadron of stealth bombers. Yeah, that definitely indicates something more serious than, standard procedures.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Alongside these B-2s, the report also mentions at least 3 C-17 Globemaster III cargo planes being there.
Right.
You can think of the C-17 as like the military's heavy lifter.
I know.
It can carry huge amounts of equipment and personnel over really long distances.
Okay.
It's basically like the backbone of any quick military deployment. And on top of that, the satellite images apparently show as many as 10 aerial refueling tankers on the ground.
Oh, wow.
These tankers are crucial because they can extend the range and how long planes like the B-2 can stay in the air. They can stay up there and on mission for much longer without needing to land.
Right.
This suggests they could be planning for some sustained long-range operations.
Wow. Okay. So the War Zone uses pretty strong wording here, saying that the scale and the nature of this deployment is far beyond routine operations.
Right.
And they even make a comparison to a past event to highlight just how significant this is.
Yeah, they bring up the time in 2022 when 4 B-2 bombers were sent to Australia.
Right.
That deployment back then, it was seen by many as a deliberate show of force by the U.S. in the Pacific, mainly aimed at China.
Yeah.
The fact that this current buildup on Diego Garcia could involve even more of these strategic bombers really makes you think they're sending an even stronger message this time, maybe directed at more players or, to prepare for different situations.
Right. Okay, so it's not just based on satellite images, though, right?
Yeah.
There's some pretty convincing audio evidence, too, that the War Zone uncovered.
Absolutely. They also mentioned these air traffic control audio recordings that caught conversations from 2 B-2 bombers flying over Australia earlier this week.
Oh, wow.
The crews in the recordings apparently confirmed that there was a 3rd B-2 flying with them, which means there were at least 3 stealth bombers moving together towards that region.
Wow. Okay.
And here's another interesting thing. The report mentions that a 4th B-2 had some kind of problem while it was flying and had to make an emergency landing in Hawaii. This might suggest that even more bombers were initially on their way.
Wow. Okay, so we know for sure there were at least 3, and probably more, B-2 stealth bombers heading toward this, strategically important location.
Right.
And the audio evidence goes even further, doesn't it?
Yeah, there are more air traffic recordings that suggest that even more B-2 bombers were taking off from White Man Air Force Base in Missouri, which is where all the U.S. B-2s are based. And they were also headed for Diego Garcia.
Gotcha.
So when you put the satellite images and the air traffic control audio together, what you get is a picture of a big and very carefully planned deployment of some of the U.S. military's most important and valuable assets to this island.
Wow, this remote island.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got a clear sign of a pretty big military buildup happening on Diego Garcia. Now let's get into the really important question for anyone following global affairs and especially for those UPSC aspirants out there. Why now? What's going on right now? That might be the reason for this deployment.
The timing, like the war zone says, is definitely crucial.
Yeah.
This military activity on Diego Garcia, it's all happening while the U.S. is stepping up its campaign against the Iran-backed Houthis in Yemen.
Right.
We've seen the U.S. military responding more forcefully lately to the Houthis' ongoing attacks on commercial and military ships in the Red Sea.
And those Houthi attacks, they had quieted down for a bit before picking up again recently, right?
That's right. There was a period of relative calm, but then the Houthis started attacking ships again in this really important international trade route.
Yeah.
And, to understand the bigger picture here, it's important to know that the Houthis are apparently using Iranian-supplied precision-guided weapons in these attacks,
Yeah.
which makes things even more complicated and raises concerns about outside involvement in the conflict.
Right. So that naturally brings us to the other big thing happening right now, renewed warnings directed at Iran itself.
Exactly. This
Good.
buildup on Diego Garcia is happening at the same time as these new serious warnings are being given to Tehran about their nuclear program.
Right.
The U.S. and its partners around the world, they keep a very close eye on Iran's nuclear activities.
Right.
And any sign that they're making progress or escalating things in that area often leads to increased military presence and strategic signaling in the region.
Okay. And we've also heard some pretty strong political statements from the U.S. about the Houthi attacks and Iran's role in them.
Yeah, we have, most notably, former President Trump came out on his social media platform, Truth Social,
Wow.
and directly blamed the Houthi attacks on Iran and warned Tehran about dire consequences if they keep it up.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, there was a statement from his office that criticized the Biden administration's earlier approach to the Houthis.
Yeah.
And they also talked about how their administration's policies were effective in stopping these kinds of things from happening.
Right. So it definitely seems like a lot of people in the U.S. believe that Iran is the one pulling the strings behind the Houthi actions.
That's definitely the mismessage they're sending.
Yeah.
The idea is that Iran is giving the Houthis important resources like training money and the advanced weapons that let them carry out these disruptive attacks in such a strategically important waterway.
Wow. Okay. There was also a kind of strange incident mentioned in the reports. Something about a national security lapse in Washington involving a journalist.
Yeah.
How does that tie into all of this?
Well, it's interesting. The War Zones report mentions this incident where a journalist accidentally ended up in a secure group chat with the Secretary of Defense.
Oh, wow.
And apparently sensitive information, including possible war plans, was shared just before a U.S. military operation against the Houthis.
Oh, geez.
Former President Trump downplayed this, calling it a minor glitch.
Okay.
It might seem like a separate issue,
Yeah.
but happening while all these tensions are rising, it does highlight how intense things are operationally and the high level of military activity surrounding the situation in Yemen and the whole region.
Right. Okay. So with all this going on, the heightened tensions, the military responses, and the strong political rhetoric, the strategic importance of Diego Garcia becomes even more obvious.
Mm-hmm.
Could you maybe explain why this island is so important in the Pentagon's global strategy?
Mm-hmm.
Especially for our listeners who are getting ready for their UPSC exams.
Okay, so Diego Garcia, it's been a crucial part of the Pentagon's global strategy for a long time.
Mm.
It's way out there in the Indian Ocean.
Right.
And that location gives it several big advantages.
Yeah.
Historically, it's been a really important launching point for major U.S. military operations in the Middle East.
Yeah.
Like the operations in Afghanistan after 9/11 in 2001 and the invasion of Iraq in 2003.
Right.
Being so isolated made it a safe and pretty much unchallenged base from which to project power.
Right. So specifically thinking about the current challenges and potential threats in the Middle East, what makes Diego Garcia so valuable right now?
Well, unlike the air bases that are actually in the Middle East, Diego Garcia is thought to be out of range of most Iranian and Houthi missiles,
Oh, wow.
which makes it much safer and less vulnerable.
Mm.
It's a place where the U.S. can potentially use military force in the region without as much risk.
I see.
If you look at where it is on the map, it's about 1,960 kilometers southwest of Thiruvananthapuram in India and roughly 3,500 kilometers east of Tanzania,
Okay.
which puts it right in the middle of the Indian Ocean,
Right.
a very important area for global trade and security.
India has always had a particular view on foreign military bases in the Indian Ocean,
Mm.
especially on Diego Garcia, right?
Yes, That's been a big factor in regional geopolitics.
Right.
Back in the 1970s, India actually opposed the U.S. setting up a military base in the Indian Ocean.
Mm-hmm.
They were worried about more and more military presence from outside powers in a region that India saw as strategically important to its own security and its own sphere of influence.
Yeah.
Now, the geopolitical situation has changed since then, of course,
Yeah.
but this history shows how sensitive the issue of military deployments in this ocean has always been.
And what about the current legal and political status of Diego Garcia in terms of sovereignty?
Okay,
That's another important thing for our UPSC listeners to grasp.
so Diego Garcia is part of the Chagos archipelago,
Okay.
and while the United Kingdom officially controls the Chagos Islands, they've been talking with Mauritius about eventually handing over sovereignty. But the important thing for us is that under a plan they're discussing, the UK would keep administrative control over Diego Garcia itself
Oh,
through a long-term lease.
gotcha.
It would initially be for 99 years, but with the option to extend it further, this whole setup shows how strategically important the island is to both the UK and the US.
Right, so it seems like this buildup on Diego Garcia isn't just a one-off thing.
Right.
It's part of a bigger increase in U.S. military presence in the whole region, right?
Yeah, that's what the war zones analysis suggests.
Okay.
They say that this deployment is probably connected to a general increase in U.S. military assets in the Middle East and the surrounding areas.
Gotcha.
For example, the USS Harry S. Truman Carrier Strike Group has been deployed in the region for longer than originally planned. And then there's the USS Carl Vinson Battle Group, which has been ordered to join the Truman.
Okay.
That means the U.S. will have double the aircraft carrier presence in the area.
Wow.
It's a very significant show of naval power.
Yeah, 2 carrier strike groups working together. That's a huge amount of firepower and a wide range of capabilities.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And the reports also say that U.S. Air Force F-35A Joint Strike Fighters have been sent to the region as well.
Right.
Those are some of the most advanced combat aircraft the U.S. has. This whole military surge with air, land, and sea assets all involved really shows how seriously the U.S. is taking the current situation and how willing they are to use a lot of military power.
So all of this points to this ongoing and maybe even escalating strategic competition between the U.S. and Iran.
Yeah.
What's the bigger geopolitical picture behind all of this?
Well, you have to look at these current tensions within the context of the long and complicated relationship between the United States and Iran. The Trump administration took a really tough stance on Iran,
Right.
but they also said they were open to negotiating a new nuclear deal with Tehran. But they had one main condition for these negotiations.
Yeah.
They wanted Iran to be completely transparent about their nuclear weapons program.
Okay. And neither the past nor the current administration has completely ruled out the possibility of using military action to stop Iran from getting nuclear weapons, right?
No, they haven't. Steve Witkoff, the U.S. Special Envoy, said recently that while the U.S. would prefer to resolve things diplomatically, like through negotiations about the nuclear program and Iran's actions in the region,
Right.
they haven't taken military force off the table. If those talks don't work and Iran keeps doing things the U.S. doesn't like, they might use force.
Okay. So to sum it all up for our UPSC aspirants and everyone who's been following this closely, what are the main things we should take away from this deep dive into what's happening on Diego Garcia?
So basically what we're seeing is the U.S. flexing its military muscles in a big way in the Indian Ocean, and Diego Garcia is right at the center of it.
Right.
This buildup with advanced stealth bombers, a lot of logistical support, and a general increase in military presence in the region, it sends a strong message to Iran and its allies, like the Houthis,
Right.
especially with all the tension in the Red Sea and the ongoing worries about Iran's nuclear program.
Yeah.
And Diego Garcia's unique location being relatively far from any immediate threats makes it a very important and safe base for potential operations in this unstable part of the world.
Exactly. And for you, the listener who's prepping for the UPSC exams, understanding all these complex power dynamics, the strategic importance of places like Diego Garcia, and how military moves and diplomatic signals play off each other is absolutely crucial. This stuff is essential for your prep in current affairs, international relations, and strategic studies. Whether it's for the mains or for picking out those key details in the prelims, you really have to think about the potential long-term effects of what's happening here on things like regional stability, global trade routes, and the overall geopolitical landscape.
Thinking critically about the long-term consequences of these actions is really important.
So here's one final thought for you to consider. Given that the U.S. has launched military operations from Diego Garcia, in past conflicts. What could be their specific strategic goals this time around?
Mm-hmm.
And what are some possible long-term consequences of this military buildup in today's complex and interconnected world?
It's a really good question to think about.
It's a big question.
Yeah.
Something to really ponder as you keep following these developments.
And make sure you're analyzing these events from multiple perspectives.
Exactly. Now, if you found this deep dive insightful and helpful for understanding current affairs, especially to get ready for your UPSC exams, we would really appreciate it if you'd like this discussion. Subscribe to the deep dive for more in-depth analysis like this, and leave a comment with any questions or insights you might have.
Your participation is really valuable. It helps us create content. That's exactly what you need.
Right. We always appreciate your engagement and feedback. So our deep dive today was based on reporting from the Telegraph, which in turn was based on the expert analysis from the Warzone website. Thanks for joining us for this important discussion.
Yeah, it was a pleasure to be here.
And until next time, stay informed and stay curious.